Yo, what up guys, I'm Sammy and welcome back to the Soul Drop, and this is my performance review of the Adidas AE2. So this is Anthony Edwards' second signature shoe with Adidas, of course. And if you guys didn't know, the AE1 was one of my favorite hoop shoes when it came out. Amazing shoe. The only thing was the weight. That's kind of like the only thing I didn't like about it. It's like pretty dang heavy, but super responsive, very nice to play in. And of course we have the AE2, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say it feels very similar to the AE1 with a couple of differences, you know what I mean? So the AE2, it retails for $130, which kind of sucks, you know, because the AE1 was $120 and the AE1 low was $110. You know what I mean? I wonder if they're gonna make a low version of the AE2, by the way. You know what I mean? Like how would the design of the fangs look, you know, with a low? But also it's not really like a crazy mid-top design. It doesn't even feel like a mid-top. It basically feels kind of like a low because I still had really good ankle movement. But anyways, $130, they raised the price by $10, which kind of sucks. They always do that, you know what I mean? But if you guys do want to call, I try to leave in the free link in the description box. This colorway is available, but there's also another colorway. It's like a Timberwolves colorway that's available now as well on Adidas. So yeah, if you do choose to get the shoe or the AE1, it does help me out if you buy through the free link in the description box, or the YouTube link will be right over here. And as always, thank you guys so much for all the support. But let's get it started right off with the traction. So the traction pattern is kind of similar to the AE1 in that we do have a very nice kind of like V shape, very enlarged kind of like herringbone traction pattern, right? And in this colorway, it's pretty much a fully translucent rubber that they're using for the entire outsole, besides kind of like the outline of the outsole, you know, like on the sides, you know, it is kind of like a solid rubber. But yeah, how is the traction? So if you're playing on a clean court, it's amazing. You have a really nice hard stop, you know, it pretty much almost just as hard as the AE1. If I were to like really nitpick, I would say the AE1 is a little bit better, but the AE2 still has a very nice solid bite, right? It does have a nice loud squeak as well. That's a very nice loud high pitch squeak actually. So if you like to have a nice squeak in your hoop shoes, this shoe has got you covered. Of course, squeak has nothing to do with the performance. Moving on to the dust performance, the dust is not amazing, you know what I mean? Like the dust performance, because it does pick up a good amount of dust and it is affected by dust a lot more than the AE1, right? So when I brought both of these shoes to the gym, obviously to test them out, the AE1 for me picks up way less dust, has way better bites through dust as well, and it's just really good for dust performance for me, right? But when I switched into the AE2, it just picked up a lot more dust, you know what I mean? And if you're playing on a slightly dusty court, however, it wasn't that big of an issue, you know? When I was playing in like the LA Fitness, that court, they usually clean it. You know, they clean it kind of like in the morning, and I kind of go a little bit more at night, and it's usually slightly dusty, you know what I mean? Then with that, I just do a slight wipe and I have really good stops again, you know what I mean? So I was good to go. But then when I played in like the 24-hour fitness courts that have a lot more dust, it picked up a lot more dust and it was starting to slide around a little bit more. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but just worse than the AE1. And I would say the AE2 has similar dust performance to like the Sabrina 3s and like the Tatum 4s, the Jaw 3s, where it picks up dust and it's affected by dust a little bit more, you know what I mean? If you want like top tier dust performance, you know, you can get a shoe like the AE1, right? But if you want something like not the best but also not terrible, the AE2 is still a pretty good option, right? So if you're playing on a moderately dusty court, it's okay, you know what I mean? Again, it's affected by dust, but once you're gonna need to wipe a lot, but once you do wipe, again, you have a couple of good stops, right? But then if you're playing on a super dusty court, it starts to slide around a lot. So probably not the best. If you know you're playing on a super dirty, like not very well kept court, probably not the best option with the AE2. But you know, if you're playing on like a slightly dusty court, you'll be fine. And then moderately dusty court, it depends on like if you mind the wiping or not. If you don't mind it, then I feel like you can get away with it, but you are going to be sliding around a little bit too. So yeah, that kind of sucks, but it wasn't terrible for dust performance. I would say it's okay, right? And as far as the durability, nope, it's terrible. The rubber is so freaking soft. It's so easy to move with my fingers, and also you do have some like really thin spots in the outsole as well, which I feel like would rip off very easily if you're playing on outdoor court. So durability, not good. So the overall traction is pretty dang good, but not top tier like the AE1 was for me for some reason, right? So there is a traction there. Moving on to the heel to toe transition, also something that I really didn't like in the AE2, right? So obviously for fast breaks, you know, when you're running down the court, doing heel dominant strides, this shoe does feel a little bit clunky. So here in the heel, I don't know why this is such a stiff freaking plastic, you know what I mean? So it literally no compression at all. It feels like there's a wedge right over here on the lateral side here in the heel and also on the medial side, it feels like there's a wedge. So it's pretty dang clunky, pretty dang stiff. And you can say that the AE1 also has this plastic material. It obviously they do, but it's like a softer plastic, and if you look at the actual footage, it compresses a little bit more, so it just feels a little bit smoother. It's still not the smoothest, but it's still a little bit smoother and a little bit softer feeling here in the heel in the AE1 compared to the AE2. The AE2 is just pretty dang clunky. Again, it also feels like there's a wedge there, so I didn't like that too much, you know what I mean? But the kind of like rounded curve shape definitely does help it though. You know, it doesn't feel super terrible like boot-like, but it does feel clunky, right? And also another thing that I didn't like about it is that it has a very, very flat shape. Look at that. Why? Why? You know what I mean? First of all, it does feel a little bit like a slapper. You know, when you're kind of like running on the court, it feels a little bit like a slapper. But also another thing I don't like about the like flatter shape of any shoe or hoop shoe is that when I shoot, when you shoot, you want to be more on your toes. And if you put a little bit of weight in here in your tippy toes, it just rocks you forward. It feels really nice. Like Curry's do that a lot. You know what I mean? Same thing with the AE1. The AE1 did it pretty well. I mean, the AE1 also was a little bit more on the flatter side of things, but the AE1 has a little bit more of a curve shape than the AE2. You know what I mean? So that also was something I didn't like. Again, it's not terrible. I feel like I'm being a little bit more nitpicky. You know what I mean? But for me, I like to have a very curved shape in the forefoot, and I feel like a lot of people aren't gonna mind this much, but that's just something I noticed, right? But also here in the forefoot, we do have a stiffer feel. That's something I did like though. You know what I mean? It's pretty dang stiff. First of all, torsion support is very, very good. You can see the X-shaped, you know, plate, like full length plate pretty much on the bottom of the shoe, right? But yeah, torsion support is very good, and also it has a very explosive feel, right? So out of your first step, it feels very explosive, very springy, just like it did here in the AE1. But the AE1, I would say, is a little bit softer actually, you know? So that is a little bit of a difference, but again, overall, I did like the AE1 a little bit better, right? And then moving on to the cushioning setup, pretty much the exact same as the AE1 besides the heel part, right? So again, they are using light boost, or a combination of light boost and light strike. I don't really know where they're using the light strike, you know what I mean? Because if you look at the actual strobo board, it looks like it's just boost, you know, so I don't know where they're using it, but that's what they're claiming, and it's pretty much the exact same as the AE1. I mean, they're saying it's just boost and light strike, but it's like very, very similar in how it feels. So the underfoot feel, right? So the insole is pretty much the exact same. They're using a very thin, like paper stock insole, so it's not anything nice, but then they are using a softer strobo, right? There's a lot of holes in it as well, exposing the actual boost or the light boost, so pressing it is really soft, right? But the cushioning setup is really low to the ground, so you have amazing court feel, and it's comparable to the Sabrina 3. So the court feel is very similar in both of these shoes. You have amazing court feel, one of the best court feels that you can get right now on the market, right? So yeah, court feel very, very good, but because of the court feel being very good, it means the light boost, obviously the foam is pretty thin, so you get a really soft feel, but it's just like very subtle, right? You get a little bit of compression and it kind of like ends, you know what I mean? So yeah, again, it feels very similar to the AE1 in that way. But yeah, the underfoot feel, very, very nice. Step and comfort, pretty dang soft, but it's not super cushiony, super cozy, super comfortable, but you do get a little bit of comfort. It's just very, very a little amount of it, like I said, right? But the thing that I really don't like is the heel part, right? This plastic is too stiff, guys. Like, it's just really, really stiff. The A1 allows for a little bit more compression, like I said, you know, so it just feels a little bit better. Again, it wasn't my favorite here in the A1, but the A2, in my personal opinion, I feel like they just made it a little bit too stiff. And also, like I keep saying, it feels like there's a freaking wedge here, you know, like on the lateral side right here. You know what I mean? So not a huge fan of that either. Impact protection overall pretty good though. You know what I mean? Like, even though the core feels really good, I didn't really, like, my foot never really hurt, you know, and like never bottomed out the cushion where I can feel the actual like floor like I do in some shoes like the Tatum 3 and stuff like that. So impact protection overall was pretty good too. And again, like, it's a nice responsive setup with pretty okay or pretty good underfoot feel, right? But again, the only thing I didn't like is the heel part. So there is a cushioning setup there. Moving on to the upper. So at first I hated this upper. It really, really hurt my feet, especially here in my right shoe, right, or the right foot, right? So I don't know why, because I never experienced this here in the AE1, right? And here in the AE1, like, they're also using a pretty stiff plastic piece right here, but then also the sizing, like the fit is very similar too, you know. But anyways, either way, here in the AE2, like, for the first couple of times, right here, my big toe would move forward, like if I were just doing like a really hard stop going forward, like doing like a jump shot or something, it would just, it hurts really freaking bad right here. You know what I mean? It was really stiff, but then now maybe it's broken in, I don't know, but now I don't really notice it as much. You know, I still notice it sometimes, but right, like really at first, for the first couple times I played in this shoe, it really freaking hurt my big toe. You know what I mean? So just be careful with that. And I will go into like lockdown and fit. But yeah, it is really uncomfortable right here for me. At least it was for me, you know? But it does break in really nicely. Like at first it was like a lot stiffer, but now like this plastic, they're calling it the articulated thing, right? So you got two obviously, but like look, it's like, obviously it's not like super duper soft, especially compared to like the Sabrina 3, right? But it does get pretty soft. Look, like moves pretty easily, and that's what happened here in the A1 too. You know what I mean? Like it's very, not very soft, but it's a lot softer than when you first get it, you know? So yeah, don't be too intimidated by it, but again, you are going to need to break it in. There is a break-in period, you know? And then on top of your foot, you do have this kind of like textile material with this kind of like overlay on it. And here in the A1, in this colorway, it's like this fuzzy kind of like cheaper material, but in this colorway for the A2, it's like almost a reflective material. It's soft right there, but then does get a little bit stiffer here, but once you break it, it does get a little bit softer, you know? And then here the midfoot, you have this softer material. It's like this molded textile, and look at how soft it is. Look at how thin it is. It's so weird, you know? But yeah, it's a very interesting feel. It's really thin too. There's not a whole lot of padding there, right? And then for the actual midfoot area too, you got eyelets that kind of like go into the upper too, giving you better support, you know? And then for the tongue, you have very minimal padding, right? It's weird because it looks thick, right? But there's no foam there, you know? There's no actual foam padding there, which is kind of weird. You got Anthony Edwards logo here on top of the tongue. It's also a half booty construction tongue, giving you a better overall one-to-one fit. And then here in the ankle area, we have a couple of interesting elements here in the back of the shoe, right? So first of all, we got Achilles pads, but they're the lowest Achilles pads that I've ever seen, right? But it does actually improve the lockdown a little bit, you know, in the heel, but that does feel kind of cozy, right? And then also we do have this crazy like neoprene type of material that just goes all the way down here into the back of the shoe. Look at this. You know what I mean? So that kind of like goes over your Achilles and it feels really comfortable, and it almost like stretches over it as well, which feels nice, you know? And then obviously we do have like it looks like carbon fiber. I mean, in the tech specs, they do say it's carbon fiber though, in like kind of like the leaked catalog tech specs. You know what I mean? It says it's a mix of carbon and plastic, but either way, you do have that. You know, it looks almost like, it looks like a mask, almost like Spider-Man, you know what I mean? But you have that here in the heel too. So yeah, again, you do need to break it in. It is pretty stiff at first, and it is pretty painful, or it was for me. But once you break it in, it does get a little bit softer, but still has a very stiff and supportive and rigid feel, comparing it to shoes that have a really minimal and soft feel like the Sabrina 3, right? So it's night and day. It's very different how it feels on foot, obviously. So yeah, also you do have a lot of the plastic. It does scuff very easily, like the AE1, right? The AE1 also scuffed a lot too with this plastic material, so just be careful with that. But I mean, obviously, if you're playing basketball, if you're hooping, that's what happens, right? So there's that. Moving on to the fit. So the fit is like perfect for me though. You know what I mean? So I went true to size. I went the exact same size here in the AE1 and in the A2. And the A2 is like really nice for me. You know, lengthwise, perfect. So I guess if you never want to experience that toe banging problem that I had, maybe go up half a size. But again, it's gonna be a little bit long, you know? So I guess just that all depends. And also here in the toe box, it does get a little bit looser. It's kind of weird. I guess this textile material does kind of like stretch out a little bit. So it did get a little bit roomier. Just kind of weird, you know what I mean? But again, it's still a pretty snug fit, but it's just not as snug as when I first got it, or maybe it's not as rigid as when I first got it, right? So that does break in here, you know what I mean? It gets a little bit roomier, you know? Also width, it is very similar to the AE1 where it's a little bit narrow as well. Like here in the pinky toe and ring toe area, it just squeezed. Very typical kind of like Adidas fit for me, you know? So yeah, I guess if you can, probably just try these shoes out first, you know what I mean? Like if you try them out, go true to size, it's gonna be a nice fit, but then just see if your toes go to the edge of the shoe. But also that does have to do a little bit with the lockdown, which we'll get into, right? So the lockdown is weird. So when I really crank down the laces, you know, my foot obviously has really good lockdown. It doesn't move forward, right? But even when I play for a little bit, like even a couple plays, you know, it would loosen the fit for some reason, and then it wouldn't be as tight anymore. And then when I started doing like the forward movements, my toe would bang a little bit, and I guess like the forefoot lockdown wouldn't be as good, maybe, I don't know. But my big toe would hit the edge of the shoe and it would hurt, you know what I mean? Again, it's not as bad now that I've broken it in, but it's still there a little bit, you know? So yeah, and even if I double knotted, obviously when you're playing hard and your feet are hot and stuff like that, the shoe loosens up, the laces loosen up. So just that's also another thing to keep in mind, is that if you do go true to size, you might experience that. But also if you do go up half a size, you're not gonna have that, but then it's gonna be a little bit long. So there might be a little bit of a trade-off though. But again, there is a break-in period. It definitely doesn't hurt as much anymore, but it still does happen to me a little bit, you know? So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's just a weird kind of like lockdown problem that I had here in the forefoot. But obviously lateral containment, you're gonna be, look at this, you know what I mean? Like you're covered here in the forefoot and heel. You know, you got this crazy articulated thing also with this plastic, you know, the plastic literally goes all the way here into the forefoot and comes all the way up, right? So you're good here. Also here in the heel, you're good to go. You're not midfoot, very, very soft, but you don't need anything here if you're covered here in the heel and forefoot. So yeah, even if you're a bigger dude, your foot's not coming out of the footbed. And also with this material, it does have very good kind of like support for the upper, you know, so my foot wasn't moving really at all inside of the shoe. Heel lockdown was fine for me, you know, and once you break it in, it does get a little bit softer, you know, for the feel here, for the actual like bottom, like the sole of the shoe. So my foot doesn't feel like it wants to pop out of the shoe as much. So the overall heel lockdown feels pretty nice for me as well. No problems with that. So yeah, I mean, obviously with the AE2, support and lockdown, very, very nice. It's just, you know, I guess maybe it's the fit that's a little bit weird. So the forefoot lockdown just going forward wasn't the best for me, right? So there is the support and lockdown there. Moving on to the weight of the shoe. Yeah, this shoe is heavy, but they are saying the AE2, they kind of like shed off some weight from the AE1. The AE1 is freaking heavy. The AE1 is like 15 ounces or something. 15.55, 15.6 ounces, right? That's freaking heavy, right? But the AE2 is a little bit lighter, coming in at 14.15 ounces, so around an ounce and a half lighter. Let's check the other shoe. 14 ounces, right? It's still heavy though. 14 ounces is still freaking heavy. And when I was playing in both of these shoes, I definitely noticed a little bit of a difference in weight, you know, just a tiny bit, but it still had a really similar feel, like the upper, the cushion. But also one thing that didn't help was that the sole of the shoe is a little bit stiffer. So it has a little bit more of a stiffer, kind of like rigid feel than the AE1, which made it feel not as like lightweight, you know what I mean? Because shoes that are a little bit more nimble and flexible tend to feel a little bit lighter as opposed to something that's really stiff, you know what I mean? So yeah, like it wasn't that big of a difference for me when I was playing both of the shoes as far as the weight goes. But yeah, is the AE2 responsive? Very responsive. Also, one thing that I really liked about it was like it had that explosive feel. So like out of the first step, I had a very explosive, kind of like springy feel, but it was a little bit of a slapper. Didn't really like the clunkiness here in the heel, but yeah, I guess I do like how they shed off the weight, right? So there is the weight there. Moving on to the ventilation. Nope, this shoe's freaking hot, guys. I mean, there's not too much airflow going throughout this entire upper for the shoes, so yeah, it's a little bit on the warmer side of things. And moving on to the aesthetics, I really like it. I think it's a great looking shoe. You know, it definitely looks super unique as well with these kind of like fangs, and also here this like the heel counter. But do I think it looks as good as the AE1? I think the AE1, in my personal opinion, looks a little bit better, but I still like how the AE2 looks. So tell us what you guys think of the aesthetics down in the comment section below. So wrapping things up, and the only thing that's kind of upgraded in my personal opinion is the weight. It's a little bit lighter, you know, or it's a lot lighter, an ounce and a half around, right? But the traction, not as good as the AE1 on dust, right? Also, the cushion is very similar for the underfoot feel, like very, very similar for the overall feel of the cushion, but not a huge fan of the clunkiness here in the heel, right? Also, for some reason, the forefoot lockdown just for me wasn't as good. Also, a little bit more of a slapper as well compared to the AE1 for me. So with all those, I just feel like it's a little bit of a downgrade, just a tiny bit. It's not as good as the A1. It feels like a very similar shoe though, a very, very similar feel. However, I feel like the A2 is not as good for me, in my personal opinion, as the A1, besides the weight though. It just kind of sucks. I wish they would have got rid of this, have a little bit more of a curved shape, you know, and I don't know how they would fix the forefoot lockdown, but not have that issue either, and also have better dust performance, you know. So anyways, it's not terrible. And again, it has a very similar feel to the AE1, which makes the shoe a very nice performer. But I feel like if you did like the AE1 and you want to get the AE2, you'll like the AE2 still. But in my personal opinion, it's just like a slightly worse version of the AE1, right? But anyways, that about concludes my performance review of the Adidas AE2. Again, if you guys do want to cop, I'll try to leave in a free link in the description box. But that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.